Introduction. So over over you is the greatest enemy a man can have, and that is fear. I know some of you are afraid to listen to the truth. You have been raised on fear and lies, but I'm going to preach to you the truth until you are free of that fear. The fearful attitude. In the beginning, fear was a basic, simple emotion for the human animal. We confronted something overwhelming, the imminent threat of death in the form of wars, plagues, and natural disasters, and we felt fear. As for any animal, this emotion had a protective function. It allowed us to take notice of a danger and retreat in time. For us humans, it served an additional positive purpose. We could remember the source of the threat and protect ourselves better next time. Civilization depended on this ability to foresee and forestall dangers from the environment. Out of fear, we also developed religion and various belief systems to comfort us. Fear is the oldest and the strongest emotion known to man, something deeply inscribed in our nervous system and subconscious. Over time, however, something strange began to happen. The actual terrors that we faced began to lessen in intensity as we gained increasing control over our environment. But instead of our fears lessening as well, they began to multiply in number. Hint, hint. We started to worry about our status in society, whether people liked us or how we fit into the group. We became anxious for our livelihoods, the future of our families and children, our personal health, the aging process. Instead of a simple, intense fear of something powerful and real, we developed a kind of generalized anxiety. It was as if thousands of years of feeling fear in the face of nature could not go away. We had to find something at which to direct our anxiety, no matter how small or improbable. Hear that? In the evolution of fear, a decisive moment occurred in the 19th century when people in advertising and journalism discovered that if they framed their stories and appeals with fear, they could capture our attention. A lot of that going on right now, ain't it? Ooh, let's get going. It is an emotion we find hard to resist or control. So they constantly shifted our focus to new possible sources of anxiety. The latest health scare, the new crime wave, a social foe we might be committing, and endless hazards in the environment of which we are not aware. With the increasing sophistication of the media and the visceral quality of the imagery, they have been able to give us the feeling that we are fragile creatures in an environment full of danger. Even though we live in an infinitely safer and more predictable, we live in a world infinitely safer and predictable than anything our ancestors knew. With their help, our anxieties have only increased. Fear is not designed for such a purpose. Its function is to stimulate powerful physical responses, allowing an animal to retreat in time after the event it is supposed to go away. An animal that cannot let go of its fears once the threat is gone will find it hard to eat and sleep. We are the only animal that cannot get rid of its fears, and when so many of them lay inside of us, these fears tend to color how we see the world. Like I said, what's going on right now. We shifted from feeling fear because of some threat to having a fearful attitude towards life itself. We come to see almost every event in terms of risk. We exaggerate the dangers and our vulnerability. We instantly focus on the adversity that is always possible. We are generally unaware of this phenomenon because we accept it as normal. Wow. This guy's speaking facts, big facts. In times of prosperity, we have the luxury of fretting over things, which is what this whole pandemic is teaching us, right? I know deep down y'all are feeling the words that are coming out of this book right now. I know that for a fact that some of you guys are feeling this. So Molly Jackson says that is so appropriate for the times we're in right now. Thank you for doing what you do. Hey, it's no problem. I do these, to help y'all and to help myself at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Because in this time of, a great crisis, we have to keep ourselves uplifted, and we have to arm ourselves with the knowledge and the wisdom that is going to help us get through this, but not only get through this, but also to prosper. You see what I mean? So I felt it in my heart and soul to go ahead and read this book to you guys first before I go ahead and start reading any other book. You know what I'm saying? But anyways, let's get it going because I got to read this and chapter 1 today. And I'm excited. So, yeah. In times of prosperity, we have the luxury of fretting over things. But in times of trouble, this fearful attitude becomes particularly pernicious. Such moments are when we need to solve problems, deal with reality, and move forward. But fear is a call to retreat and retrench. Retrench. Yeah, that's that word, retrench. This is precisely what Franklin Delano Roosevelt confronted when he took office in 1933. The Great Depression that had begun with the stock market crash of 1929 was now at its worst. But what struck Roosevelt was not the actual economic factors, but the mood of the public. It seemed to him that people were not only more fearful than necessary, but that their fears were making it harder to surmount adversity. In his inaugural address to the country, he said that he would not ignore such obvious realities as a collapse of the economy and that he would not preach a naive optimism. But he implored his listeners to remember that the country had faced worse things in the past, such as the Civil War. What had brought us out of such moments was our pioneer spirit, our determination and resolve. This is what it means to be an American. Fear creates its own self-fulfilling dynamic. As people give into it, they lose energy and momentum. Their lack of confidence translates into an action that lowers confidence levels even further, on and on. So, first of all, he told the audience, let me assert my belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreats into advance. What Roosevelt sketched out in his speech is the nice edge that separates failure from success in life. That edge is your attitude, which has the power to help shape your reality. If you view everything through the lens of fear, then you tend to stay in retreat mode. You can just as easily see a crisis or a problem as a challenge, an opportunity to prove your mettle, the chance to strengthen and toughen yourself, or a call to collective action. By seeing it as a challenge, you will have converted this negative into a positive purely by a mental process, emphasis on the word mental, that will result in positive action as well. So pretty much what Robert Greene is saying right here is that we have to focus our mentality on the solution to the problem instead of just ruminating over it. Like, how people are complaining during this quarantine about being stuck at home and being bored and having nothing to do. Just little stuff like that is what he's talking about. That's just one example out of many that I just thought of just now. I thought I would just bring that up. And you guys have many more that you can think of because you guys are really, really intelligent and you guys are heavily creative and you guys are amazing. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and keep on reading. Yeah. And in fact, through his inspiring leadership, FDR was able to help the country shift its mindset and confront the depression with a more enterprising spirit. Today, we seem to face new problems and crises that test our national mettle. But just as FDR made the comparison to even worse times in the past, we can say that what we are facing is not as bad as the perils of the 1930s and the subsequent war years. In fact, the reality of the 21st century America is something more like the following. Our physical environment is safer and more secure than any other environment in our history. We live in the most prosperous country in the world. In the past, only white males could play the power game. Now, millions upon millions of minorities and women have been given entrance to the arena, forever altering the dynamic, making us the most socially advanced country in that regard. Advances in technology have opened up all kinds of new opportunities. Old business models are dissolving, leaving the field open for innovation, like today's times. It is a sweet time of sweeping change and revolution. Damn. For a book that came out in 2009, this book seems to be still relevant somehow. You dig what I'm saying? We face certain challenges as well. The world has become more competitive. The economy has undeniable vulnerabilities and is in need of reinvention. As in all situations, the determining factor will be our attitude, how we choose to look at this reality. If we give in to the fear, we will give disproportionate attention to the negative and manufacture the very adverse circumstances that we dread. If we go in the opposite direction, cultivating a fearless approach to life, attacking everything with boldness and energy, then we will create a much different dynamic. And understand, we are all too afraid of offending people, of stirring up conflict, of standing out in the crowd, of taking bold action. For thousands of years, our relationship to this emotion has evolved from primitive fear of nature to a generalized anxiety about the future, to the fearful attitude that now dominates us. As rational, productive adults, we are called upon to finally overcome this downward trend and evolve beyond our fears. And here's a quote from Miles Davis. The very first thing I remember in my early childhood is a flame, a blue flame jumping off a gas stove somebody lit. I was 3 years old. I felt fear, real fear might hurt people's feelings. It can mean opting for everything to be safe and comfortable in our daily lives. So no amount of messiness can enter. When we are in this mode, it is because we feel that we are fragile and would be damaged by an encounter with the thing that we dread. The active variety is something most of us has experienced at some point of our lives. The risky or difficult situation that we fear is thrust upon us. It could be a natural disaster, a death of someone close to us, or a reversal in fortune which we lose something. Often in these moments, we find an inner strength that surprises us. What we fear is not so bad. We cannot avoid it and have to find a way to overcome our fear or suffer real consequences. Such moments are oddly therapeutic because finally we are confronting something real, not an imagined fear scenario fed to us by the media. We can let go of this fear. The problem is that such moments tend to not last very long or repeat themselves too often. They can quickly lose their value and we return to the passive avoidance mode. When we live in relative comfortable circumstances, the environment does not press on us with obvious dangers, violence, or limitations to our movement. Our main goal then is to maintain the comforts and security we have, and so we become more sensitive to the slightest risk or threat to the status quo. Again, with this whole pandemic. We find it harder to tolerate feelings of fear because they are more vague and troubling, so we remain in the passive mode. Throughout history, however, there are people who have lived in much tighter circumstances, danger pressing in on them on a daily basis. These types must confront their fears in the active mode again and again. This could be growing up in extreme poverty, facing death on a battlefield, or leading an army in war, living through tumultuous revolutionary periods, being a leader in a time of crisis, suffering personal loss or tragedy, or having a brush with death. Countless people grow up in or with such circumstances, and their spirit is crushed by adversity. But a few rise above. It is their only positive choice. They must confront these daily fears and overcome them, or submit to the downward pull They are toughened and hardened to the point of steel. Understand, no one is born this way. It is unnatural to not feel fear. It is a process that requires challenges and tests. What separates those that goes under from those who rises above adversity is the strength of their will and their hunger for power. At some point, this defensive position of overcoming fears to converts to an offensive one, a fearless attitude. Such types learn the value of not only being unafraid, but also attacking life with a sense of boldness and urgency and unconventional approach, creating new models instead of following old ones. They see great power this brings them, and soon it becomes their dominant mindset. We find these types in all cultures and time periods, from Socrates and the Stoics to Cornelius Vanderbilt and Abraham Lincoln. Napoleon Bonaparte represents a classic fearless type. He began his career in the military just as the French Revolution exploded. At this critical moment in his life, he had to experience one of the most chaotic and terrifying periods in history. He faced endless dangers on a battlefield as a new kind of warfare was emerging, and he navigated through the innumerable political intrigues in which one wrong move can lead to the guillotine. He emerged from all of this with a fearless spirit, embracing the chaos of the times and the vast changes going on in the art of war. And in one of his innumerable campaigns, he expressed the words that can serve as the motto for all fearless types. In the spring of 1800, he was preparing to lead an army into Italy. His field marshals warned him that the Alps were not passable at the time of the year and told him to wait, even though waiting would spoil the chances for success. Makes you think. And yeah, where was I? All right, right there. The general replied to them, "For Napoleon's army there shall be no Alps." And mounted on a mule, Napoleon proceeded to personally lead his troops through the treacherous terrain and past innumerable obstacles. It was a force of one man's will that brought them through the Alps, catching the enemy completely by surprise and defeating them. There are no Alps and no obstacles that can stand in the way of a person without fears. Another example of the type would be the great abolitionist and writer Frederick Douglass, who was born into slavery in Maryland in 1817. As he later wrote, slavery was a system that depended on the creation of deeper levels of fear. Douglass continually forced himself in the opposite direction. Despite the threat of severe punishment, he secretly taught himself how to read and write. When he was whipped for his rebellious attitude, he fought back and saw that he was whipped less often. Without money or connections, he escaped to the North at the age of 20. He became a leading abolitionist, touring the North and telling audiences about the evils of slavery. The abolitionists wanted him to stay on his lecture circuit and repeat the same stories over and over, but Douglass wanted to do much more, and he once again rebelled. He founded his own anti-slavery newspaper, an unheard of act for a former slave. The newspaper went on to have a tremendous success. At each stage of his life, Douglass was tested by the powerful odds against him. Instead of giving in to the fear of whippings, being alone on the streets of unfamiliar cities, facing the wrath of the abolitionists, he raised his level of boldness and pushed himself further onto the offensive. This confidence gave him the power to rise above the fierce resistances that the animosities of those around him. That is the physics that all the fearless types discover at some point. An appropriate ratcheting up of self-belief and energy when facing negative or even impossible circumstances. Fearless people do not emerge exclusively from poverty or a harsh physical environment. Franklin Delano Roosevelt grew up in a wealthy, privileged family. At the age of 39, he contracted polio, which paralyzed him from the waist down. This was a turning point in his life as he faced severe limitation to his movement and possibly the end of his political career. He refused, however, to give in to the fear and the downward pull on the spirit. He went the opposite direction, struggling to make the most of the physical condition and developing an indomitable spirit that would transform him into the most fearless president. For this type of reason, any kind of encounter with adversity or limitation at any age can serve as the crucible for forging attitude. The new fearless type. This past, the Negro's past of rope, fire, torture, death, and humiliation, fear by day and night, fear as deep as the marrow of the bone. This past, this endless struggle to achieve and reveal and confirm a human identity, yet contains for all its horror something very beautiful. People who cannot suffer can never grow up, can never discover who they are. James Baldwin. Through much of the 19th century, Americans faced all kinds of dangers and adversity. The hostile physical environment of the frontier, sharp political divisions, a lawlessness and chaos that came of great changes in technology and social mobility. We responded to this constructive environment by overcoming our fears and developing what became known as a pioneer spirit, our sense of adventure and renowned ability to solve problems. With our growing prosperity, this began to change. In the 20th century, however, one environment remained as harsh as ever, the black ghettos of inner city America. And out of such crucible, a new fearless type came forward, exemplified by figures such as James Baldwin, Malcolm X, and Muhammad Ali. But the racism of the times constructed their ability to give them full reign to the spirit. In recent times, newer types have emerged from inner city America with more freedom to advance to the highest points of the power in America, in entertainment, politics, and business. They came from a Wild West-like environment in which they have learned to fend for themselves and give full rein to their ambition. Their education comes from the streets and their own rough experiences, aka the school of hard knocks. Yeah, woo. It's hot in this car. You know what I'm saying? We getting it done, baby. We getting it done. Yeah. In a way, there are throwbacks to the freewheeling types of the 19th century who had little formal schooling but created a new way of doing business. Their spirit fits the disorder of the 21st century. They are fascinating to watch, in some ways have much to teach us. I don't know why I butchered that. Anyways, let's go. The rapper known as 50 Cent, aka Curtis Jackson, who also co-wrote this book, would have to be considered one of the most dramatic contemporary examples of this phenomenon and this type. He grew up in a particularly violent, intense neighborhood, Southside Queens, in the midst of the crack epidemic of the 1980s. And in each phase of his life, he has had to face a series of dangers that both tested and toughened him, rituals of initiation into the fearless attitude he has slowly shaped and developed. One of the greatest fears that any child has, and that of being abandoned, left alone in a terrifying world. It is the source of our most primal nightmares. This was 50's reality. He never knew his father, and his mother was murdered when he was 8 years old. He quickly developed the habit of not depending on other people to protect him or shelter him. This meant that in every subsequent encounter in life which he felt fear, he could only turn to himself, which is what we're being forced to do right now. Yeah. If he did not want to feel the emotion, he had to learn to overcome it on his own. He began hustling on the streets at an early age, and there was no way he could avoid feeling fear. On a daily basis, he had to confront violence and aggression. And seeing fear in action so routinely, he understood what a destructive and debilitating emotion it could be. On the streets, showing fear would mean people lose respect for you. You will wind up being pushed around and more likely to suffer violence because of your desire to avoid it. You had no choice. If you were to have any kind of power as a hustler, you had to overcome this emotion. No one could read it in your eyes. This meant that he would have to place himself again and again in the situations that stimulated anxiety. The first time he faced someone with a gun, he was frightened. The second time, less so. The third time, it meant nothing. Testing and proving his courage in this way gave him a feeling of tremendous power. He quickly learned the value of boldness, how it can push others on the heels by feeling supreme confidence in himself. But no matter how tough and hardened they become, hustlers usually face one daunting obstacle: the fear of leaving the streets that are so familiar and that have taught them all of their skills. And again, you don't have to be from the streets to know how this applies to you. So, in actuality, just take the information that I'm reading from you in this book and see, how it fits your circumstances, and just use your own creativity from there. Yeah. They become addicted to the lifestyle. Even though they are likely to end up in prison or die an early death, they cannot leave the hustling racket. 50, however, had greater ambitions than to become merely a successful hustler. So he forced himself to face and overcome this one powerful fear. At the age of 20, and at the peak of his hustling success, he decided to cut ties to the game and dive into the music racket without any connections or safety net. Because he had no plan B, it was either succeed at music or go under. He operated with a frantic, bold energy that got him noticed in the rap world. He was still a very young man when he had faced down some of the worst fears that can afflict a human: abandonment, violence, radical change. And he had emerged stronger and more resilient. But at the age of 24, on the eve of the release of his first record, he came face to face with what many of us would consider the ultimate fear: that of death itself. Yeah. In May of 2000, an assassin poured 9 bullets into him in broad daylight as he sat in his car outside of the house, one bullet going through his jaw, coming within a millimeter of killing him. In the aftermath of the shooting, Columbia Records dropped him from the label, canceling the release of his first album. He was quickly blackballed from the industry as the record executives were afraid to have any kind of involvement with him and the violence he was associated with. Many of his friends turned against him, perhaps sensing his weakness. Not only, he now had no money. He couldn't really return to hustling after turning his back on it, and his music career seemed to be over. So basically, at this point of his life, he pretty much just lost everything. This was one of those turning points that reveals the power of one's attitude in the face of adversity. It was as if he were confronting the impassable Alps. At this moment, he did as Frederick Douglass did. He decided to ratchet up his anger, energy, and fearlessness. Coming so close to death, he now understood how short life can be, or could be. He would not waste a second. He would spur the usual path to success, working within the record industry, nabbling that golden deal, and putting out music they thought would sell. He would go his own way, launching a mixtape campaign in which he would sell his music or give it away for free on the streets. In this way, he could hone the hard and raw sounds that he felt were more natural to him. He could speak the language of the hood without having to soften it at all. Suddenly, he felt a great sense of freedom. He could create his own business model, be as unconventional as he desired. He felt like he had nothing to lose, as if it were the last bits of fear that still remained with him had bled out in a car that day in 2000. The mixtape campaign made him famous on the streets and caught the attention of Eminem, who quickly signed 50 to his and Dr. Dre's label, setting the stage for 50's meteoric rise to the top of the music world in 2003, and the subsequent creation of the business empire he had forged since. We are living through strange revolutionary times, indeed. The old order is crumbling right before our eyes on so many levels, and yet in such an unruly moment, our leaders in business and politics cling on to the past and the old way of doing things. They are afraid of change and any kind of disorder. The new fearless types, as represented by 50, move in the opposite direction. They find that the chaos of the time suits their temperament. They had grown up being unafraid of experimentation, hustling, trying new ways of operating. They embraced the advances in technology that make others secretly fearful. They let go of the past and create their own business model. They do not give in to the conservative spirit that haunts corporate America in this radical period. At the core of their success is a premise, a law of power that has been known and used by all the fearless spirits in the past and is the foundation of any kind of success in the world. The greatest fear people have is that of being themselves. They want to be 50 Cent or someone else. They do what everyone else does, even if it does not fit where and who they are. But you get nowhere that way. Your energy is weak and no one pays attention to you. You're running away from that one thing that you own, what makes you different. I lost that fear, and once I felt that power that I had by showing the world I didn't care about being liked by other people, I can never go back. 50 Cent. The 50th law is based on the following premise. We humans have generally little control over circumstances. People intersect our lives, doing things directly and indirectly to us, and we spend our days reacting to what they bring. Good things come our way, followed by bad things. We struggle as best we can to gain some control because being helpless in the face of events makes us unhappy. Sometimes we succeed, but the margin of control that we have over people and the circumstances is depressingly narrow. The 50th law, however, states that there is one thing we can actually control, the mindset with which we respond to those events around us. And if we are able to overcome our anxieties and forge a fearless attitude towards life, something strange and remarkable can occur. The margin of control over circumstances increases. At its utmost point, we can even create the circumstances themselves, which is the source of the tremendous power that the fearless types have had throughout the history. And the people who practice the 50th law in their lives all share certain qualities: supreme boldness, unconventionality, fluidity, and a sense of urgency that gives them this unique ability to shape circumstance. A bold act requires a high degree of confidence. People who are targets of an audacious act or who witness it cannot help but believe that such confidence is real and justified. They respond instinctively by backing up, by getting out of the way, or by following a confident person. A bold act can put people on their heels and eliminate obstacles. In this way, it creates its own favorable circumstances. We are social creatures, so it is natural for us to want to conform to the people around us and the norms of the group. But underneath this deep fear, that of sticking out, of following our own path no matter what people think of us. The fearless types are able to conquer this fear. They fascinate us by how far they go with their unconventionality. We secretly admire and respect them for this. We wish we could act more like they do. Normally, it is hard to hold our attention. We shift our interest from one spectacle to the next, but those who fearlessly express their difference compel our attention on the deeper level for a longer duration, which translates into power and control. Many of us respond to the shifting circumstances of life by trying to micromanage everything in our immediate environment. When something unexpected happens, we become rigid and we respond by employing some tactic that worked in the past. If the events change quickly, we are easily overwhelmed and lose control. Those who follow the 50th law are not afraid of the change or chaos. They embrace it by being as fluid as possible. They move with the flow of events and then gently channel them in the direction of their choice, exploiting the moments. Through their mindset, they convert a negative, unexpected events into a positive, an opportunity. Having a brush with death or being reminded in a dramatic way of the shortness of our lives can have a positive therapeutic effect. Our days are numbered, and so it is best to make every moment count, to have a sense of urgency about life. It can end at any moment. The fearless types gain such awareness through some traumatic experience. They are energized to make the most of every action. The moment gives them in life helps them to determine what happens next. It is all rather simple. When you transgress this fundamental law by bringing your usual fears into any encounter, you narrow your options and capacity to shape events. Your fear can even bring you into a negative field where your powers are reversed. Being conservative, for instance, can force you into a corner in which you are more likely to lose what you have in the long run because you lose the capacity to adapt to change. Trying so hard to please people can actually end up pushing them away. It is hard to respect someone who has in such an ingratiating attitude. If you are afraid to learn from your mistakes, you will more than likely keep repeating them. When you transgress this law, no amount of education, connections, or technical knowledge can save you. Your fearful attitude encloses you in an invisible prison, and there you will remain. Observing the 50th law creates the opposite dynamic. It opens up possibilities, brings freedom of action, and creates a forward momentum in life. The key to possessing this supreme power is to assume the active mode in dealing with your fears. This means entering the very arenas you normally shy away from, making very hard decisions you have been avoiding, confronting the people who are playing power games with you, thinking of yourself and what you need instead of pleasing others, making yourself change the direction of your life, even though such a change is the very thing you dread, which is what we're all being forced to do literally right about now. If you've been paying attention. Yeah. Anyways, you deliberately put yourself in difficult situations and you examine your reactions. In each case, you will notice that your fears were exaggerated and that confronting them has the bracing effect of bringing you closer to reality. At some point, you will discover the power of reversal. Overcoming the negative of a particular fear leads to a positive quality. Self-reliance, patience, supreme self-confidence, on and on. Each of the following chapters will highlight this in this reversal of perspective. Once you start on this path, it is hard to turn back, and you will continue all the way to a bold and fearless approach to everything. Understand, you don't have to grow up in Southside Queens or being the target of assassins to develop this attitude. All of us face challenges, rivals, and setbacks. We choose to ignore or avoid them out of fear. It is not the physical reality of your environment that matters, but your mental state, how you come to deal with adversity that is the part of your life on every level. 50 had to confront his fears. You must choose to. Finally, your attitude has the power of shaping reality in two opposite directions. One that constructs that corners you in with fear, the other opens up possibilities and freedom of action. It is the same for the mindset and the spirit you bring. It is the same mindset and spirit that you bring to reading the chapters that follow. If you read them with your ego in front, feeling that you are being judged here or are under attack. In other words, if you read them in a defensive mode, then you needlessly close yourself off from the power this could bring you. We are all human. We are all implicated by our fears. No one is being judged. Similarly, if you read these words as narrow prescriptions for your life, trying to follow them to the letter, then you are constricting their value, their application to your reality. Instead, you must absorb the words with an open and fearless spirit, letting the ideas get under your skin and affect how you see the world. Do not be afraid to experiment with them. In this way, you will shape the book to your circumstances and gain power over the world. In my view, it is better to be impetuous than cautious because fortune is a woman, and if you wish to dominate her, you must beat her and batter her. It is clear that she will let herself be won by men who are impetuous, or impetus, however the hell you pronounce this goddamn word, rather than by those who step cautiously. So, and this is coined by Niccolo Machiavelli. So, basically what he's saying is that if you want to have fortune, you have to take initiative and you have to do your part in adding value. So don't take this literally as him literally saying that you literally have to beat and batter women, because we don't do domestic violence around here. We don't do any of that. So I just wanted to say that real quick before I go ahead and move on to the first chapter of the book. I just wrapped up the introduction. And if you guys are hopping on this live video and you haven't been on the last one, this is actually a continuation from the first one because, like I said, the first one just basically crashed on me conveniently. And I had to shoot a second one. So, yeah, here's the very first chapter right now. See things for what they are. Intense realism. Reality can be rather harsh. Your days are numbered. It takes constant effort to carve a place for yourself in this ruthlessly competitive world and hold on to it. People can be treacherous. They bring endless battles into your life. Your task is to resist the temptation to wish it were all different. Instead, you must fearlessly accept these circumstances, even embrace them. By focusing your attention on what is going on around you, you will gain a sharp appreciation for what makes some people advance and others fall behind. By seeing through people's manipulations, you can turn them around. The firmer your grasp on reality, the more power you will have to alter it for your purposes. The Hustler's Eye. This is life, new and strange. Strange because we fear it, new because we have kept our eyes turned from it. Men are men and life is life, and we must deal with them as they are. If we want to change them, we must deal with them in the form in which they exist. A quote by Richard Wright. As a boy, Curtis Jackson, aka 50 Cent, who also again co-wrote this book that I'm reading right now, The 50th Law, he wanted more than anything the very things that it seemed that he could never have: money, freedom, and power. Looking out on the streets of Southside Queens, where he grew up, Curtis saw a grim, depressing reality staring him in the face. He could go to school and take it seriously, but the kids who did that didn't seem to get very far. A life of low-paying jobs. He could turn to crime and make his money fast, but the ones who went for that either died young or spent much of their youth in prison. He could escape it all by taking drugs. Once you start down that path, there's no turning back. Obviously, don't want to do drugs or anything that's harmful to your well-being. The only people who could see who led the life that he dreamed of were the hustlers, the drug dealers. They had the cars, the clothes, the lifestyle, the degree of power that matched his ambitions. And so, by the age of 11, he had made the choice to follow that path and become the greatest hustler of them all. The further he got into it, however, the more he realized that the reality was much grimier and harsher than he had imagined. Of course it is. I mean, you selling drugs. What do you expect? The fellow hustlers were all fighting over the same limited number of corners, and they'd stab you in the back in an instant. The big-time dealers who ran the neighborhood could be violent and heavy-handed. If you did too well, someone would try to take what you had. The police were everywhere. One wrong move could land you in prison. How could he possibly succeed amidst this chaos and avoid all the inevitable dangers? It seemed impossible. One day, he was discussing the troublesome aspects of the game with an older hustler named Truth, who told them something he would never forget. Don't complain about the difficult circumstances, he said. In fact, the hard life of these streets is a blessing if you know what you are doing. Because it is such a dangerous world, a hustler has to focus intensely on what's going on around him. He has to get a feel for the streets, who's trouble, and where they might be some new opportunity. He has to see through all the bullshit people throw at him, their games, their lousy ideas. He has to look at himself, see his own limitations and stupidity. All of this sharpens the eye to a razor's edge, making him a keen observer of everything. That is his power. The greatest danger we faced, he told Curtis, is not the police or some nasty rival. It's the mind going soft. Very profound. I've seen it happen to many a hustler, he said. If things go well, he starts thinking it will go on forever and he takes his eyes off the streets. If things go bad, he starts wishing it were all different. And he comes up with some foolish scheme to get quick, easy money. Either way, he falls fast. Lose your grip on reality on these streets. In the months to come, Curtis thought more and more about what truth had told him. What truth had told him. And it began to sink in. He decided to transform the hustler's words into a kind of code that he would live by. He would trust no one. He would conceal his intentions even from his friends and partners, and no matter how high or low life brought him, he would remain the supreme realist, keeping his hustler's eyes sharp and focused. Over the next few years, he became one of the savviest hustlers in his neighborhood, operating a small crew that bought him good money. The future looked promising, but a moment in attention got him trapped in a police sting, and at age 16, he was sentenced to 9 months in a shock rehabilitation center in upstate New York. In his familiar space and with time to reflect, suddenly the words of truth came back to him. This was not the time to get depressed or to dream, but to fix that hustler's eye on himself and the world he'd live in. See it as it is, no matter how ugly. And that is what this pandemic is teaching us right now. That no matter what kind of chaos is going on, no matter how ugly things seem to be, gotta focus, your spiritual eye and your physical eyes as well on, the beauty of this and see it from a higher perspective instead of getting caught up and swept up in all of the chaos and madness and all the mass hysteria that seems to be possessing most people right now. Get it? Got it? Good. He had unbridled ambition. He wanted real power, something he could build on. But no street hustler lasts that long. It's a young man's game. By the time hustlers reach their 20s, they slow down and something bad happens or they go scurrying into a low-paying job. And what binds them to this reality is the money and lifestyle in the moment, like these 9-to-5 jobs. They think it will go on forever. They're too afraid to try something else. It doesn't matter how clever you are, there's a ceiling on how high you can rise. He had to wake up and get out while he was still young and his ambitions could be realized. He would not be afraid. And so, based on these reflections, he decided that he would break into music. He would find a mentor, someone who could teach him the ropes. He would learn everything he could about the music and the business. He would have no plan B. It was either make it here or die. Operating with a kind of desperate energy, he made the transition into music, carving a place for himself by creating a sound that was hard driving and reflected the realities of the streets. After a relentless mixtape campaign in New York, he got the attention of Eminem and a record deal followed. Now he seemed to have realized his childhood ambitions. He had money and power. People were nice to him. Everywhere he went, they flattered him, wanting to be a part of his success, which unfortunately continues to happen. When you start getting some success, people gonna start flooding in and want favors from you and asking you for this and that and la 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 la. And it seems to be an ongoing thing no matter what decade we live in. Anyways, where I leave off at? He could feel it happening. The good press, the cycle. Everywhere he went, they flattered him, wanting to be part of his success. He could feel it happening. The good press, the sycophantic followers, it was all starting to go to his head and dull his vision. On the surface, everything looked great, but what was the reality here? Now more than ever, he needed that clear, penetrating eye to see past the hype and the glamour. The more he looked at it, the more he realized that the reality of the music business was harsh as the streets. The executives who ran the labels were ruthless. They distracted you with their charming words, but in fact, they can care less about your future as an artist. They wanted to suck you dry for every dollar they can get out of you. Once you were no longer so hot, you will find yourself slowly pushed to the side. Your decline will be all the more painful for having once tasted success. In truth, you were a pawn in their game. A corner hustler had more control over his future than a rapper did. And the business itself. Record sales were falling because people were pirating music or buying it in different forms. Anyone with two eyes can see that. The old business model had to go, but these very same executives seemed so sharp were afraid to confront this reality. They held on tightly to the past and would bring everyone down with them. Now 50, he would have to avoid this fate by moving in a different direction. He would forge a diversified business empire, music merely being a tool to get there. His decisions would be based on his intense reading of the changing environment that he had detected in the music but was infecting all levels of business. Let others depend on their MBAs, their money, and yeah, and their connections. He instead will rely upon that hustler's eye that had brought him from the bottom of America to the top in just a few short years. The fearless approach. Reality is my drug. The more of it I have, the more power I get and the higher I feel. 50 Cent. You might imagine that the streets that had molded 50 and the code he had created for himself have little to do with your circumstances, but that's merely a symptom of your dreaming and how deeply you are infected with deeply infected with fantasies and how afraid you are to face reality. The world has become as grimy and dangerous as the streets of Southside Queens. A global competitive environment in which everyone is a ruthless hustler out for him or herself. Truth's words apply to you as much as 50. The greatest danger you face is your mind growing soft and your eye getting dull. When things get tough and you grow tired of the grind, your mind tends to drift into fantasies. You wish things were a certain way. And slowly, subtly, you turn inward to your thoughts and desires. If things are going well, you become complacent, imagining that what you have now will continue on forever, like these jobs. Okay, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna keep reading. You stop paying attention. Before you know it, you end up overwhelmed by the changes going on and the younger people rising up, challenging your position. Understand, you need this code even more now than 50. His world was so harsh and dangerous that it forced him to open his eyes to reality and to never lose that connection. Your world seems cozier and less violent, less immediately dangerous. It makes you wander and your eyes mist over with dreams. Yeah, the competitive dynamic, the streets, the business world is in fact the same. Your apparently comfortable environment makes it harder for you to see it. Reality has its own power. You turn your back on it, but it will find you in the end. Your inability to cope with it will be your ruin. Now is the time to stop drifting and to wake up. Okay, I'm just gonna sit it right here so I keep moving around. Yeah, to assess yourself and the people around you, the direction in which you are headed, as cold and as brutal of a light as possible without fear. Think of reality in the following terms. The people around you are generally mysterious. Yeah, where was I? Yeah, right here. You are never quite sure about their intentions. They present an appearance that is often deceptive. Their manipulative actions don't match their lofty words or promises. All of this can prove confusing. Seeing people as they are instead of what you think they should be would mean having a greater sense of their motives. It means being able to pierce the facade they present to the world and see their true character. Your actions in life will be so much more effective with this knowledge. Your line of work is another layer of reality. Right now, things might seem calm on the surface, but there are changes rippling through that world, dangers that are looming on the horizon. Soon, your assumptions about how things are done will be outdated. These changes and problems are not immediately apparent. Being able to see through them before they become too large will bring you great power. The capacity to see the reality behind the appearance is not a function of education or cleverness, People can be full of book knowledge and crammed with information but have no real sense of what's going on around them. I ain't gonna lie, that was me for a long time. Just keeping it 100. Simply, no way, I'm going too far ahead of myself. Yeah, it is a function of character and fearlessness. Simply put, realists are not afraid to look at the harsh circumstances of life. They sharpen their eye by paying keen attention to details, to people's intentions, to the dark realities hiding behind any glamorous surface. Like any muscle that is trained, they develop the capacity to see with more intensity. It is simply a choice you have to make. At any moment in life, you can convert to realism, which is not a belief system at all, but a way of looking at the world. It means every circumstance, every individual is different, and your task is to measure that difference, then take appropriate action. Your eyes are fixed on the world, not on yourself or your ego. What you see determines what you think and how you act. The moment you believe in some cherished idea that you will hold on to no matter what your eyes and ears reveal to you, you are no longer a realist. To see this power in action, look at a man like Abraham Lincoln, perhaps our greatest president. He had little formal education and grew up in a harsh frontier environment. As a young man, he liked to take apart machines and put them back together. He was practical at his core. As a president, he found himself having to confront the greatest crisis in our history. He was surrounded by cabinet members and advisors who were out to promote themselves or some rigid ideology they believed in. They were emotional and heated. They saw Lincoln as weak. He seemed to take a long time to make a decision, and it would often be the opposite of what they had counseled. He trusted generals like Ulysses S. Grant, who was an alcoholic and a social misfit. He worked with those whom his advisors considered political enemies on the other side of the aisle. What they did not realize at the time was that Lincoln came to each circumstance without preconceptions. He was determined to measure everything exactly as it was. His choices was made out of pure pragmatism. He was a keen observer of human nature and stuck with Grant because he saw him as the only general capable of effective action. He judged people by the results, not by friendliness or political values. His careful weighing of people's events was not the weakness, but the height of strength, a fearless quality. And working this way, he carefully guided the country past countless dangers. It is not a history we are accustomed to reading about, since we prefer to be swept up in great ideas and dramatic gestures. But the genius of Lincoln was his ability to focus intensely on the reality and seeing things for what they were. He was a living testament to the power of realism. It might seem that seeing so much of reality can make one depressed, but the opposite was the case. Having clarity about where you are headed, what people are up to, and what is happening in the world around you will translate into confidence and power, a sensation of lightness. You will feel more connected to your environment, like a spider on its web. Whenever things go wrong in life, you will be able to right yourself faster than others, because you will quickly see what is really going on and how you can exploit even the worst moment. And once you taste this power, you will find more satisfaction from an intense absorption in reality than in indulging in any kind of fantasy. Keys to fearlessness. Know the other, know yourself, and victory will not be at risk. Know the ground, know the natural conditions, and a victory will be total. Sun Tzu. America was a country of great realists and pragmatists. This came from the harshness of the environment, the many dangers of frontier life. We had to become keen observers of everything going on around us to survive. In the 19th century, such a way of looking at the world led to innumerable inventions, the accumulation of wealth, and the emergence of country as a great power. But with this growing power, the environment no longer pressed upon us so violently, and our character began to change. Reality can be seen as something to avoid. Secretly and slowly, we developed a taste for escape. from our problems at work, from the harshness of life. Our culture began to manufacture endless fantasies for us to consume. And fed on such illusions, we become easier to deceive since we no longer had a mental barometer for distinguishing fact from fiction. This is a dynamic that has repeated itself throughout history. Ancient Rome began as a small city-state. Its citizens were tough and stoic. They were famous for their pragmatism. But as they moved from being a republic to an empire and their power expanded, everything reversed itself. Their citizens' minds hungered for newer and newer forms of escape. They lost all sense of proportion. Petty political battles consumed their attention more than larger dangers on the outskirts of the empire. The empire fell well before the invasion of the barbarians. It collapsed from the collective softness of its citizens' minds and turning their back on reality. Understand, as an individual, you cannot stop the tide of fantasy and escapism sweeping the culture. But you can stand as an individual bulwark to this trend and create power for yourself. You were born with the greatest weapon of nature, the rational conscious mind. It has the power to expand your vision far and wide, giving you the unique capacity to distinguish patterns in events, learn from the past, glimpse into the future, see through appearances. Circumstances are conspiring to dull that weapon and render it useless by turning you inward and making you afraid of reality. Consider it war. You must fight this tendency as best as you can and move in the opposite direction. You must turn outward and become a keen observer of all of that is around you. You are doing battle against all fantasies that are thrown at you. You are tightening your connection to the environment. You want clarity, not escape and confusion. You want that. You want that shit. Let me keep on. Alright. Moving in this direction will constantly bring power among so many dreamers. Regard the following exercises for your mind to make it less rigid, more penetrating and expansive, a sharper gauge of reality. Practice all of them as often as you can. Rediscover curiosity, openness. One day, it came to the attention of the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates that the Oracle of Delphi pronounced him the wisest man in the world. This baffled the philosopher. He did not think him so worthy of such a decree. It made him uncomfortable. He decided to simply go around Athens and find a person who was wiser than he. That should be easy, and it would disprove the oracle. He engaged in many discussions with politicians, poets, craftsmen, and fellow philosophers. He began to realize that the oracle was right. All of the people he talked to were certain, had such a certainty about things, venturing solid opinions about matters of which they had no experience. They were full of so much air. If you questioned them at all, they could not really defend their opinions, which seemed based on something they had decided years earlier. His superiority, he realized, was that he knew nothing. This left his mind open to experiencing things as they are, the source of all knowledge. This position of basic ignorance was what you had as a child. You had a need and a hunger for knowledge to overcome this ignorance. So you observed the world as closely as possible, absorbing large amounts of information. Everything was a source of wonder. With time, our minds tend to close off. At some point, we feel like we know what we need to know. Our opinions are certain and firm. We do this out of fear. We don't want our assumptions about life challenge. If we go too far in this direction, we become extremely defensive, cover up our fears by acting with supreme confidence and certainty. What you need to do in life is return to that mind you possessed as a child, opening up to the experience instead of closing it off to experience. Just imagine for a day that you do not know anything, that what you believe could be completely false. Let go of your preconceptions and even your most cherished beliefs. Experiment. Force yourself to hold the opposite opinion or see the world through your enemy's eyes. Listen to the people around you with more attentiveness. See everything as a source of education, even in most banal encounters. Imagine that the world is still full of mystery, because it is. When you operate this way, you will notice that something strange often happens. Opportunities will begin to fall into your lap because you are suddenly more receptive to them. Sometimes luck or serendipity is more of a function of the openness of your mind. Know the complete terrain, expansion. War is fought over a specific terrain, but there is more involved than just that. There is also the morale of the enemy soldiers, the political leaders who set them in motion, the minds of opposing generals who make the key decisions, and the money and resources that you can take behind that stand behind it all. A mediocre general will confine his knowledge to the physical realm, or the physical terrain. A better general would try to expand his knowledge by regarding reports about the other factors that influence an army. And the superior general will intensify his knowledge by observing so much as he can with his own eyes or consulting first-hand sources. Napoleon Bonaparte is the greatest general who had ever lived, and what elevated him above all the others was the mass information that he absorbed about all the details of battle, with as few filters as possible. This gave him a superior grasp on reality. Your goal is to follow the path of Napoleon. You want to take in as much as possible with your own eyes. You communicate with people up and down the chain of command within your organization. You do not draw any barriers to your social interactions. You want to expand your access to different ideas. Force yourself to go to events and places that are beyond your usual circle. If you cannot observe something firsthand, try to get reports that are more direct and less filtered, or vary the sources so that you can see things from several sides. Get a fingertip feel for everything going on in your environment, the complete terrain. Dig to the roots, depth. Malcolm X was a realist. He had a way of looking at the world that was honed by years on the streets and in prison. After prison, his mission in life was to figure out the source of the problem for blacks in America. As he explained in his autobiography, the country goes in for the surface glossing over, the escape ruse, surfaces instead of truly dealing with its deep-rooted problems. He decided to dig as far below the surface as possible. Finally, he arrived at what he believed to be the root cause, dependency. As it stood, Americans couldn't do it completely on their own. They I almost hiccuped there. They depended on the government, on liberals, on their leaders, on everybody but themselves. If they could end this dependency, they would have the power to reverse everything. Malcolm X died before he can go further with his life's mission, but his method remains valid for all time. When you do not get to the root of a problem, you cannot solve it in any meaningful manner. People like to look at surfaces, get all emotional, and react. Doing things that make them feel better in the short term, but doing nothing for them in the long term. This must be the power and the direction of your mind whenever you encounter some problem. To bore deeper and deeper until you get something basic and at the root. Never be satisfied with what presents itself to your eyes. See what underlies it all, absorb it, and then dig deeper. Always question why this particular event has happened. What was the motives of the various actors are? Who really is in control? Who benefits by this action? Often, it will revolve around money and power. This is what people are usually fighting over, despite the glossy surface or the gloss that they give it. You may never get to the actual root, but the process of digging will bring you closer and closer, and operating this way will help you develop your mind into a powerful analytical instrument. You see what I mean? Like, this guy is speaking facts. If you guys do not pick up this book, if you do not click the link and pick up this book, you guys are severely, and I mean severely, missing out. Go buy the book for yourself. Read it, mark on it, do whatever you want to do with it. But I'm telling you, Robert Greene is an incredible author and he's very insightful. He's one of my favorite authors of all time, which is the reason why I chose this to be the very first book that I read, because I want to spread this like the virus for you guys to get it. And whatever you do with it afterwards, it's up to you. You know what I mean? I just wanted to say that real quick before I continue. If you have a long-term goal for yourself, one that you have imagined in great detail, then you are better able to make the proper decisions in the present. You know which battles or positions to avoid because they don't advance you towards your goal. With your gaze lifted to the future, you can focus on the dangers looming on the horizon and take proactive measures to avert them. You have a sense of proportion. Sometimes the things we fuss over in the present don't matter in the long run. Real talk, in real time. Yeah, all of this gives you an increased power to reach your objectives. As part of this process, look at the smaller problems that are plaguing you or your enterprise in the present and draw arrows to the future, imagining what they could possibly lead to if they grow larger. Think of your own biggest mistakes or those others. How could they have been foreseen? Generally, these are signs that become so obvious afterwards. Facts. Now imagine the very same signs that you are probably ignoring in the present. Look at people's deeds, not words. Sharpness. In war or any competitive game, you don't pay attention to people's good or bad intentions. They don't matter. It should be the same in the game of life. Everyone is playing to win, and some people will use moral justifications to advance their side. In other words, what he's talking about is that people are willing to bend their moral code to such a degree to get whatever they want. And we see this in the world all the time, guys. You guys can come up with examples on your own time because you guys have your own unique experiences where you've seen the same scenario play out over and over and over and over and over again. Right? So let's continue. So, all you look at are people's maneuvers, their actions in the past, and what you might expect in the future. In this area, you are fiercely realistic. You'll understand that everyone is after power, and that to get it, we all occasionally manipulate and even deceive. That is human nature, and there is no shame in it. Not sure why he even said that, but okay. You don't take people's maneuvers personally. You merely try to defend or advance yourself. As part of this approach, you must become better observer of people. This cannot be undone on the internet. It must be honed in personal interactions. You are trying to read people, see through them as best you can. You come to understand, for instance, that a person who is too obviously friendly after too short a time is often up to no good. If they flatter you, it is generally out of envy. Behavior that stands out and seems excessive is a sign. Don't get caught up in people's grand gestures and the public face that they put on. Pay more attention to the details, to the little things that they reveal in their day-to-day lives. Their decisions reveal a lot, and you can discern a pattern if you look at them closely. In general, looking at people through the lens of your emotions will cloud what you see and make you misunderstand everything. What you want is a sharp eye towards your fellow humans, one that is piercing, objective, and non-judgmental. Reassess yourself. Detachment. Your increasing powers of observation must occasionally be aimed at yourself. Think of this as a ritual you will engage in every few weeks. A rigorous assessment of who you are and where you are headed. Look at your most recent actions as if they were the maneuvers of another person. Imagine how you could have done it all better. Avoided unnecessary battles or confronted people who stood in your way instead of running away from them. The goal here is to not beat up yourself, but to have the capacity to adapt and change your behavior by moving closer to reality. The end game of such an exercise is to cultivate the proper sense of detachment from yourself and from life. It is not that you want to feel this detachment at every moment. There are times that require you to act with heart and boldness without doubts or self-distance. On many occasions, however, you need to be able to assess what is happening without your ego and emotions coloring your perceptions. Moving to a calm, detached inner position to observe events will become a habit and something that you can rely on amid any crises. At the at those moments in life when others lose their balance, you will find yours with relative ease. As a person who cannot be easily ruffled by events, you will attract attention and power. Reversal of perspective. The word realist often comes with some negative connotations. Realists, according to conventional wisdom, can be practical to a fault. They often lack the feel of the finer, higher things in life. Taken too far, such types can be cynical, manipulative, Machiavellian. They stand in contrast to dreamers, people of high imagination who inspire us with their ideals or divert us with their fanatical creations. This is a concept that comes from looking at the world through the lens of fear. It is time we reverse this perspective and see the dreamers and the realists in their true light. The dreamers, those who misread the actual state of affairs and act upon their emotions, are often the source of the greatest mistakes in history. The wars that are not thought out, the disasters that are not foreseen. Realists, yeah. Blah, blah, blah. Realists, on the other hand, are the real inventors and innovators. They are men and women of imagination. Yeah, but their imagination is in closer contact with their environment, with reality. They are empirical scientists, writers with a sharp understanding of human nature, or leaders who guide us thoughtfully through crises. They are strong enough to see the world as it is, including their own personal inadequacies. Let us take this further. The real poetry and beauty in life comes from an intense relationship with reality and all its aspects. Realism is in fact the ideal that we must aspire to the highest point of human rationality. And here's a quote from James Baldwin. People who cling on to their illusions find it difficult, if not impossible, to learn anything worth learning. A people under the necessity of creating themselves must examine everything and soak up learning the way the roots of a tree soak up water.